But when I saw this vision of my mom, she looked exactly like she had looked prior to her dying. And she looked normal. She looked healthy. She looked better than she had ever looked.
Welcome back to another edition of the Real Spiritual Talk podcast. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, and today my guest had a near death experience that set her on a journey of healing. Joining us today, ladies and gentlemen, is near death experiencer Patrice Ben Shushon. Patrice, welcome to the Real Spiritual Talk podcast.
Thank you so much, Lamont. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely, no problem at all. Now, Patrice, before we get into your near death experience, let's talk a little bit about any previous religious or spiritual beliefs you may have held prior to having your near death experience. Were there any?
Yes, there were. When I was born, actually, I happened to be born into a family that my grandfather on my paternal side was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. So there was a lot of Orthodox Judaism that was placed upon me as a child and as a young adult, as a young teenager. And then once my parents got divorced, those things seemed to change. However, I was already bought into Judaism. So, for lack of better ways to say it, yes, I was born and raised Jewish.
And within your faith, did you have a concept of something like the afterlife?
Within my faith, we typically don't talk about heaven and earth, heaven and the other, if you will. But what we do talk about is that the soul lives into eternity. And so that is what I knew. And that is what I had studied for so many years, um, throughout elementary school and high school, up until I was a senior in high school when I graduated and was confirmed. So
So,
yes, there was a deep sense of uh, religion as far as religion is concerned, and spirituality was a whole separate subject. That was something that I had to find out later on.
and I think it's time for us to get into that, to discuss what you learned about spirituality up and close with your own particular experience. And with that said, why don't we talk about what it was that actually triggered your near death experience to occur?
Well, what actually triggered it is, well, it's questionable. I will say that in on September the 12th of 2013, I was at a hotel. I had just retired and moved from my permanent residence, which I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I moved down to where I presently live to retire in Florida. And when I arrived here, I was in a hotel because I had no permanent place to live. And I had shortly thereafter found a place to live that was permanent and had about 3 or 4 days before I was going to move in to the permanent place. Uh, Once I made that decision to go ahead and move to the permanent place of living, I was sitting on the outside on the curb next to my vehicle at the hotel where I was staying prior to moving into my permanent location. And up drives this police officer, and he looked at me and he said, he got out of his vehicle and he started screaming and yelling at the top of his lungs at me that I was trespassing on the hotel property, that I was not a registered guest, and I had 2 minutes to get off the property. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there with my receipt, with my service animal, whom was euthanized shortly thereafter, which is against the law, and a couple of other things that had occurred. And he was screaming and yelling at me that I was fasting and that I needed to leave the property. Well, one thing led to the next, and I couldn't get off the property fast enough. They took me and pounded me into the hot pavement, onto the cement, onto the asphalt of the parking lot of the hotel. And I immediately experienced a traumatic brain injury, which I was unaware of at the time. And all of my teeth were loosened and subsequently had to be taken out. That was what started the whole thing, but what led to the near-death experience, I had two. One was at that point, I was transported to somewhere, and I don't know where. And then they transported me to some hospital, and I had vague memories of being at the hospital where I initially had the first near death experience. And I saw, as I was re waking up, apparently, I woke up. And as I was waking up, I saw a vision of my mom, who had been deceased for about 15 years at the time. And she came to see me once, she came to see me twice, and I woke up. And that was the next thing that I remember, is the doctors and the nurses asking me questions, and I could not speak. I'd lost my ability to speak. I had aphasia at the time. I had suffered a traumatic brain injury and, like I said, a loosening of all of my teeth.
So let
And
me ask you.
it was at the hands of a police officer who caused all of that.
Okay, that's exactly what my question was going to be. So your near-death experience was basically triggered because of this beating that you received at the hands of a police officer, and you
I
believe,
was severely beaten.
and from there you were transported somewhere, and then ultimately you were transported to a hospital, and it was there where you had this vision of your deceased mother, as you stated, who was deceased for 15 years now. What did she look like? Did she look her age? Did she look younger? Did she look realistic? Did she look like she was some sort of aberration?
No, she looked realistic and she looked like my mom. And what was crazy is that in the room where I was supposedly at, which I was never inside of a room at this particular hospital, I was in the emergency area in the hallway, apparently. But when I saw this vision of my mom, she looked exactly like she had looked prior to her dying. And she looked normal. She looked healthy. She looked better than she had ever looked. And she was lying down on this, uh, it was kind of like a chaise. And she was not lying on it. She was kind of floating just a tad bit above it so that her body was not touching the chaise. She was just floating kind of there above the chaise, looking at me, talking with me. She didn't say much the first two times that she came to see me. And then I suddenly was being asked a bunch of questions by doctors and nurses. And that was it. That was the first time.
So my next question concerning this meeting with your mother, you talked about her speaking with you. I wanted to ask about the communication. What exactly do you recall her saying, and was the communication audible in your ears, or do you feel it was inward and telepathic?
It was the first time it was telepathic more. The second time that I heard her, it was more real. It felt very realistic, and it felt like uh, I felt like she was right there with me, but she was hovering on this chaise and she was not touching the chaise. Her back and body was not touching the chaise. I could see her, and she looked fabulous. She looked like she had not been sick at all.
What did she say to you? Was there a message delivered to you at all?
The first message was, "I'll be right back." She came right back. The second message was, "I'll be back in a few minutes." And it seemed like just a few minutes that she came back. And the third message that she gave to me, which was very audible, I could hear it. And I could not see her, but I could hear it. And what she told me was, the reason why I kept having to leave and come back those multiple times was because I had to check to see if it was time for me to take you all the way home.
Wow.
and I didn't know how to take that. So I was pretty much in a comatose state. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do anything. I wanted to jump out of my own skin and go with her, but I
Yeah.
didn't know how to do any of that because I was in kind of a comatose state.
Yeah. Many near death experiencers, once they typically see a deceased relative, the message they usually get back is, it's not your time. But
Well,
here,
it was weird. It was so weird because it felt like it was time
yeah, but
to
here
me.
you were given the message that your mother had to check to see if it was your
Right,
time or not.
right. She had to go back. She kept leaving and coming back. And when she left and came back the third time, she said it wasn't, she had to find out whether it was time for me to leave for good and
Yes,
go all the way home.
that is so fascinating. I don't think I've had ever heard a near death experience where the deceased had to check to see if it was the
It
time.
was wild. When I tell you, when I woke up and I was able, this was years later that I was able to, it came back to me that it was years later, over a decade later. And this happened in 20, when did that happen? That happened in 2013. On September the 12th of 2013 was when I had that first experience, and it was bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
What was
When
it
I
that
tell you,
what was it that
I
triggered your
couldn't.
recall? Do you remember?
It was the second time that I went out, the second time that I had an NDE.
Okay, so let's get into that. What was it that triggered that second near death experience?
Well, and this was odd. I was living because of the brain injury. I was 52 or 53 years old when I was subjected to the brain injury. And I was living in an assisted living facility. And at age 51, it's odd for someone to be living in an ALF because you usually, as you get older, much older, one goes to live in an assisted living facility and typically doesn't come out alive. They usually die in the facility or die in a hospital. Well, oddly enough, I was 51. I went to go live in the assisted living facility because of the brain injury. And I was running up from breakfast up 15 stairs. When I rounded the corner, I went down and I shattered my left femur. And when I shattered my left femur, my left leg was bent underneath me, and my right leg was forward. This lady, other elderly woman who was much older than I, came to me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." And I was screaming because I was in excruciating pain. And she said, "What happened?" And I said, "I fell." She goes, "But look, there's water over there and there's water underneath you." And I turned to my right and I looked on the floor and there was the tray with a cup that had spilled over and the water. Once the EMS people were called somehow. And once I got to the hospital, well, they had to take me down the stairs in this seat, this kind of nylon seat where they slid me down the steps because I couldn't walk and they couldn't lift me because of the way my leg was broken. And they got me into the ambulance, and I don't remember much of anything until uh, that was March 28th of 2017. And the next thing that I remember was in April, at the end of April of 2017, I had started hemorrhaging on April the 11th or 12th of 2017 I was at a nursing facility, a nursing home rehab, and I started hemorrhaging at the rehab nursing facility. They had me immediately taken by ambulance to the nearest hospital. And at that hospital was when I had my second near death experience. And that's when I completely went out, and my mom came to visit me again. She came to visit me on three different occasions. The same thing, the first two, she had to go check And that's what she told me on the third time, was that it still wasn't my time to go all the way home, and that I was supposed to stay right where I was, not to move, to do what they told me to do, and that it was not time for me to go all the way home. It was the weirdest experience, and it was the most intense near-death experience that I had, and I literally had less than 1% chance of survival at the time.
Now, what made this particular near-death experience, this second one, so intense? What did you feel? What was the feeling while you were out in this otherworldly realm?
I felt like I was halfway in between here and there. And it was very, very, very bright and colorful. It wasn't white. It was colorful. It was like a rainbowish kind of colors. And what I felt like is I felt no pain. I felt absolute, utter joy because I was elation almost, because I was going to go see my mom.
Were you surprised to see your mom, given that you had already seen her in the past with your first near-death experience?
I wasn't surprised. I was in utter disbelief. I couldn't believe that my mother was there, because she told me prior to her death that she was going to be waiting for me and my siblings when we got there. There
So,
being wherever that may be.
yes, exactly. And did she still look perfectly normal and perfectly healthy and fine as she did with your first near-death experience?
She looked better the second NDE than she did the first NDE.
Wow,
She
very
looked like a
interesting.
younger version of herself.
The way you would have remembered her perhaps growing up as a small child or even before
When
you
I
were
was,
born.
yeah, when I was, no, not before I was born, but when I was probably around 5, 6, 7.
Did you, when you came back from this particular near-death experience? I know with the first one you said you were comatose. What was your condition here?
Same. I went in, well, medicinally comatose this time. And once they medicinally put me in a coma, my vitals went down to the point where I was not going to make it. I mean, they really did not think I was going to make it. They had to call my siblings in Atlanta and in North Carolina, and they had to hurry up and get down to Jacksonville, Florida, where I am. And because they were told that I was not going to make it and they need to get down here.
When you
So
came,
the feeling was in between life and death, if that makes sense.
yes, and you stated originally that it's because of this near-death experience that you recalled the first one.
Yes, because there were so many similarities with my mom being a part of both of them, that when I remembered the second one, it triggered something that caused me to remember the first one, because the first one had been so many years prior. And I
Yes,
had zero recollection of the first one at first.
and I understand when you attempted to communicate what you experienced, in particular to doctors, you were met with disbelief.
Yes, utter disbelief. And they didn't believe that I had a near-death experience. None of them. In fact, this day, the only person that does believe me, that doctor-wise, that's in the medical profession, is my orthopedic surgeon, who literally had to take my left leg, and he was either going to amputate it mid-thigh or he was going to fix it. And he said if he fixed it, I would probably never walk anyway. To this day, I walk without a limp, and I have both of my own legs. And my left leg on the inside, there is no bone that belongs to me. It is all titanium on the inside. And I walk with zero limp, no pain.
Yes, sort of miraculous in a way.
It was a miracle. It is a miracle. For me to be sitting here having this conversation with you is miraculous. And I know that. And it has changed my whole perspective on what dying looked like, what it was going to be like, and what it was going to feel like, what I was going to feel like, which was absolutely no pain. There was no pain at all. Prior to these NDEs, I had excruciating pain. Excruciating. And I'm allergic to pain medication, so I couldn't take anything. So for whatever it's worth, it was and I stare sometimes when I'm thinking. I stare outward. It was something that is so hard to explain. I explained it to a therapist, and she said, I kind of understand what you're saying. She was the only person that really acknowledged the fact that she believed me, number one, and number two, that she kind of could understand where I was coming from. And I asked her, I said, how can you kind of, she said, because I've had a kind of near-death experience myself. And so it made me feel validated, if you will, somewhat validated.
Did you attempt to share any of this with family members? I know you said you grew up in a religious household, a Jewish household. Did you attempt to share any of what you saw in this experience with them?
I did. I attempted to share it with, in fact, I didn't attempt. I shared it with both my younger brother and my older sister. And neither one of them had, it didn't feel like to me that they believed a word that was coming out of my mouth. Not one word. And that for me was heart-wrenching, because I had seen our mom twice on two different occasions within years apart. There were years that had transpired.
Sounds very
So
touching
for me,
when you attempt to tell it to people you love and they're not giving you the reaction you think they should give you.
well, it's not even so much that I thought they should. I felt like they could have just listened without judgment. And without judgment for me is huge, because they weren't there. I was.
Many near-death experiencers come back changed, different, and I think you got into that a little bit. They usually come back with a lack of fear of death. If they did fear death prior, they come back sometimes with higher levels of premonition,
Mm,
higher levels of precognition. They
I
come
have
back.
that.
They come back seeing the world from a totally different perspective. Everything's beautiful. Did you come back with anything remotely close to these?
All of those things that you just mentioned, every single one of them I came back with. And I came back with, I was so fearful of dying prior to all of this. Today, if God took me today in this instant, I'd be okay. Because I know that it's not painful. I know that it's not harmful. I know that I'm going to a place that is bright, colorful, and I just don't fear it anymore. It's part of who I am, and it's manifested itself into my not being afraid. And as far as religious and spiritual, religion versus spirituality, the religion part didn't go out the window, but it's not nearly as intense as my relationship is with my spirit. My spirituality grew exponentially.
Yeah, and typically that's what happens with a near-death experiencer. Perhaps they were religious before having a near-death experience, but after the experience, they come back using the same language. They're more spiritual. They're
Yeah,
deeper. They're deeply connected with things that they probably took for granted before.
no question about it. There is no doubt about that. That is 100% accurate as far as I was concerned. And it was when I awakened, I was absolutely, initially, I was frightened because I couldn't believe, and I was angry because I couldn't believe that I had to wake up and come back to this thing called life. I didn't want to have to go through it again. I wanted to just go to that peaceful place that I had seen. And colorful.
Yeah, near-death experiencers often describe seeing colors that don't look like any color they've ever seen in the earthly realm.
That's true. It was like I said, it was kind of rainbowish like, but it wasn't the colors of the rainbow, but it was very, very bright. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. I did not want to come back.
Coming back into your body the second time again, did it leave you with a yearning to immediately go back after you recalled the near-death experience?
Yes. It gave me a yearning to go back immediately. And if I had had my druthers and I could have done it, and it was within my power, I would have gone. There's not a doubt in my mind that I would have gone. Because life is hard. Life is very hard. Death is a lot easier than life. And it's a lot more pleasant at times.
Even still, your mother, your deceased mother, one of the messages she gave you, or at least was a consistent message, was not yet, right? It's not your time yet. She had to check to see if it was time, but she told you to remain here and do what they say. So it looks like you've got more purpose here.
There is a purpose. There are purposes, and I find them. I feel them before they occur. I have had a sixth sense for quite some time prior to either of these NDEs, and it has gotten nothing but intensely stronger since then. And I can foresee things that occur. I foresee them prior to them happening. And it's happened to me on a multitude of occasions. More times than I can even count now.
Yeah. Certainly one of the after effects that many near-death experiencers come back with, as you stated, that you pretty much have precognition, you've got premonitions, the
I
lack
have
of fear
had
of death.
my therapists tell me that I have gained psychic abilities, some level of psychic abilities, which I believe.
Yeah. And many near-death experiencers, once again, come back feeling like they were touched by the other side.
I was definitely touched by an angel.
Yeah. And that the recall, what they felt there is just a part of them, is just etched into their being. What you went through, what your mother said to you, what you felt like when you were there, it's just etched in, and you can never forget about it.
Oh, it'll never go away. And when God needs to take me, when it's time for me to go, I won't be afraid because it is etched in me and I remember it. But it took years to remember it. It took time, particularly the first time because of the brain injury.
Yes, miraculous indeed. Well, Patrice, I want to thank you for coming on the Real Spiritual Talk podcast and sharing with us those absolutely fascinating near-death experience accounts.
Thank you very much, Lamont, for having me. This is the first time and the only time that I'm going to go through this.
No
so
problem.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem at all. I thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, Patrice Ben Shushon.
Thank you.